Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone on the call. You're all very welcome and we are delighted you've taken the time to join us. We have a really interesting agenda and 3 experts on the panel. We are very lucky today. My name is Andrew Robinson, and on behalf of Copyright Clearance Centre, or CCC, it's my job to welcome everyone to this, the 4th event in our series on Workflow of the Future, where we will focus on standards and sustainability. This is a hugely important topic for all of us, our companies, professionally and personally. Climate change is affecting everyone. We are impacting the environment and the environment is impacting us. Standards help solve problems, make us safer and reduce barriers to trade. They can also help us with the complexity of sustainability and make measurable differences. Some organisations are leading the way and others don't know where or how to start. This event is for everyone, and we want to hear from you over the next hour or so. We expect a lively conversation and have time to run over the hour if we need to, so please stay with us, and most importantly, join in. The event will be recorded and a recording made available afterwards. Shorter blog posts will also be created. I'll now hand over to my colleague and facilitator for the event, Jonathan Clark, to introduce the panel and start the conversation. Jonathan, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. So welcome again, everyone. Just to let you know what to expect this afternoon for the next hour or so, or as Andrew said, we can go a little later. We've got a welcome introduction, that's what we're doing now. We have 3 panelists for you and they will spend a little bit of time having some opening words to introduce everything. And then we have an open discussion. And please, at any time you have a question or a comment or want to add to the discussion, then please just chat that and we'll pick it up. And we've got 3 just fantastic, amazing panelists for you today. It really is a pleasure and an honor to introduce them. And we'll go straight on. So we've got Holly Elwood, Micah Lucan, and Holly Niebuhr. And I will waste no time in going on to introduce Holly Elwood. Holly is a senior advisor for the EPA, and she works in their environmentally preferable purchasing program. And that's a program that helps federal agencies factor in the environment into their purchasing decisions. And you'll hear a lot more about that from her. And she also coordinates input from the EPA into sustainability standards and helps shape and maintain their own recommendations of standards. So really, I can't think of anyone better to kick us off today. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Holly. Here you go.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you for inviting me here to speak with you all today, CCC. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm part of our environmentally preferable purchasing program. And as part of our work to help federal purchasers in the U.S. government procure more sustainable products and services, we conduct a number of different major activities. One is that we help to create and to update key product sustainability standards and eco-labels for use in federal purchasing that address product and service categories with high federal spend and with known significant environmental impact during their production, their use, and or their disposal phases. We also recognize that there are just a host of private sector standards and eco-labels in the market that are available for us to utilize to help assist in our sustainable procurement efforts. So we also assess and recommend private sector standards and eco-labels for use in federal purchasing. We've been in existence since 1993 and were put in place in order to harness the power of the federal pocketbook as the largest purchaser in the world with over $650 billion in sales of products or in purchases of products and services last year alone. To try to use our pocketbook signal to be able to shift towards a more sustainable marketplace for us all. The Biden-Harris administration and several statutes guide us in terms of what we should be thinking about and doing around sustainable purchasing. And Executive Order 14057 was issued by the Biden administration, which sets a very ambitious goal of net zero emissions procurement by 2050. And it also directs purchasers to procure products and services that meet the EPA recommended standards and eco labels. So why do we focus on sustainability standards and eco labels? First of all, because they really do help give us a tool to communicate more effectively to the vendor community about what we would like to see as far as more sustainable products and services. We also are directed to do so by another policy document called OMB Circular A119, which directs the federal community to use standards in order to meet our policy and our procurement objectives as much as possible, to try to utilize the existing resources in the market as opposed to developing another set of criteria to meet any particular policy or procurement goal. We found that it's really not enough to just tell federal purchasers that they need to go buy more sustainable products and services. They really do need some help in figuring out which tools they should use and how to find them and how to get to the products that meet those standards and eco labels. And we know that most purchasers are in that boat with federal purchasers as well. Today, there's over 460 sustainability standards and eco labels that are available in the marketplace today. And sifting through these to determine which ones apply to which product and service category and which ones really are environmentally effective and credible and have good solid conformity assessment to make sure that products in fact do meet the criteria set in those standards can be very daunting for purchasers who already have a whole host of other responsibilities that they need to meet and are not going to become environmental experts in order to make sustainable procurement happen for their organizations. So our recommendations are really intended to address that issue and give purchasers one place to go to see a set of recommended standards and eco labels that have already been vetted by the Environmental Protection Agency and our sister agencies. And so I'll put the link in the chat for that, but for those who want to take a look, it's epa.gov/greener products. And then you can see what we have. We've got 48 different standards and eco labels that we recommend today in 30 different product categories. And we are planning to expand our recommendations and have just launched a new expansion process. So if you are aware of a sustainability standard or an eco label that applies for your product or service category that you sell, or you're interested in purchasing a product that might meet a particular standard or eco label, but you're not sure about the credibility of that standard, please let us know, because we have the opportunity right now and are in the process of selecting standards and eco labels that we will be assessing in the future. And I'll put the link in the chat as well to where you can go to apply to be considered to be assessed if you're a standard developer and you have a standard that you'd like us to consider reviewing and or an eco label owner. So that's it for me, and I'm just very much looking forward to the discussion that we have today. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Holly. Are there any burning questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Just give you a second to, if there's a question specifically for Holly. I don't see anything coming, but do ask please at any time. If you don't want to put it to share with everyone, then direct chat it to myself or Andrew. So let's move on to our second panelist, Maike Lueken. Maike is chair of the Planet Positive 2030 initiative, which is something from the IEEE, and I won't say any more about that because she's going to we're going to hear about that shortly. Maike really lives and breathes sustainability and has done for many years now. She runs a startup called Carbovate Development Corporation. She's an adjunct research professor at Western University, Canada, and also a host. I mean, we had a whole slide with all of her activities. It's really very impressive. Also, if you go to the event page, you can see them all. So with that, Micah, please, and I'll run your slide deck for you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and it's a great pleasure to be here. So without further ado, let's move forward. And I'd like to give you a little bit of a context for me, but I make one correction, Jonathan. I'm not running Carbovate. I'm one of the managing directors, but just for the record. So I live in and work in Sarnia, and I'm bringing this up here because we're talking about the workflow and sustainability. Sarnia is located 30 kilometers away from the birthplace of the North American oil industry. It still has major like refineries and so on in this location, but it also changed itself greatly. A few years ago, it was the host of the largest solar power generation plant in the world at 80 megawatts for I don't know how many months or a couple of years. Then it started to look at, while we are having a sustainability initiative in the city, looking at how we can transform the chemical industry from a fossil-based feedstock to bio-based feedstock, essentially called it bio-innovation. So, as you may imagine, this small town of roughly 80,000 people really transformed itself first with the oil industry inventing a safety culture that has been exported around the globe, and then trying to change to add to the safety culture a sustainability culture, where the companies and the municipality and the educational sector all work together to really push sustainability a notch forward. So that's why I'm bringing this up, to show you the development from safety culture to sustainability culture. Thank you. So let's come to talk about IEEE. IEEE's core mission is to foster technological innovation excellence for the benefit of humanity. And that, of course, means engagement around climate change and sustainability. IEEE is a leading authority in ICTs, power and energy, and different disciplines that are all based on the electron and the photon, essentially. And the members share their expertise by working applications into different sectors, from transportation to energy to healthcare. And you see this reflected in the expanding activities of the IEEE Standards Association, where a lot of standards originally were around the energy and communications sectors. Today, the standards activities are branching along with the application of digital technology and different technologies into different sectors, like agriculture, for example. And with the advancement of AI, actually it started probably with drones, but with the advancement of these technologies, there has been a stronger focus on the impact, the societal impact of the use of technology, and what type of standards need to be developed around that in order to ensure safe and sustainable use of technology. Next. And here are some examples of standards that are related to social impact, like ethical AI systems, data governance, child online rights, dignity and agency and identity, and of course the continuance of clean and sustainable energy, looking at minimal energy use, connectivity, and mobility. And furthermore, out of the Standards Association comes these initiatives that Jonathan was referring to earlier, that I share and that we started this year, which is called Planet Positive 2030. And this is essentially an initiative to pull together experts from many different professions from around the globe to engage in a backcasting exercise, and then, of course, the writing of recommendations to figure out how we can use technology and other approaches to come to what we call Planet Positive 2030. The aim is to look at how we get to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions below 50% of 2005 by 2030, and how we can use major efforts of regeneration to come to what we call Planet Positive. In other words, give back more than we take out. So we stated it as a couple of impossible goals, because in IEEE we pride ourselves of taking the IM out of the word impossible to make things possible. And so the first one is really to transform society and infrastructure. And the second one is to identify the technological gaps and solutions that we need to deploy in order to achieve planet positivity. Why IEEE? IEEE has lots of strengths. It's a trusted source of curated technical information. I already mentioned standards. IEEE is great at convening at all levels, from local to global, and the facilitation of communities, like the Planet Positive community. Next slide, please. At a glance, it has global reach, with many members in 160 countries, and it's built on 46 societies and councils with different focus areas, from robotics to vehicular technology to the impact of technology on society, and of course, energy. I mentioned the technical depths to a certain extent, so there's with the curated materials. So the true technical breadth here, from plus like 2,000 plus conferences, in an electronic library that is approaching 6 million technical documents, 200 top-cited periodicals, and of course standards. And most recently, the impact on the social side with global public policy, humanitarian efforts, and ethics and technology as the newest effort. I think that the IEEE standards efforts around ethics and technology are the first ones that have been undertaken by any standards organization, but I stand corrected. So let's go back to Planet Positive in a sense. So the contributors I mentioned, so right now we've got about 400, and I invite you to participate, anybody who is on this call, to join us. We have about 400 from 20 plus countries. And you can see the bios and the involvement at the link that's posted. So what is the outcome that is expected? It's a compendium we call Strong Sustainability by Design, and an assessment framework that looks at accountability, and call it accountability, accountable sustainability by design. The idea being that like we have designed projects and products for a long time with safety first, we now want to look at designing of whatever we design with sustainability in mind first, rather than as an afterthought. And here's one piece that I'd like to share. It's on the assessment framework. We have one tool that we are evaluating right now, that is an open access tool that looks at assessing sustainability for our progress towards sustainable behavior, to sustainable action by small and medium-sized companies. And if this works, then we would like to work forward to put this into a standard to help with such a tool that is not too expensive to use for smaller companies, to then give them a way to work within this sustainability or sustainable supply chain that Holly was mentioning earlier for product. Right now, we have many tools that work for large companies, but we need to work on standardized ways of reporting for smaller companies. And with that, thank you very much. Join us. We are open to work with everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Micah. Just a reminder to put your questions into the chat, please, if you have any. We've had some come in already, but I think I'll keep them till we've heard from our last panelist, Holly Niebuhr. It's interesting. So I think in our first two panelists concentrated very much on our impact as humans on climate and on the planet and the environment. We're switching gears slightly in this final, with our final speaker, Holly Niebuhr. She's really looking at how the climate will affect us as humans, and in particular our buildings. Holly is CEO of AEI Consultants, and they provide sustainability assessment and consulting services for things like the assessment of physical climate risk and other natural hazards. So I'll hand over to Holly, and I'll run your slides for you as well. Holly.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. It's great to be here. So yeah, I'm coming here as the CEO of AEI Consultants, a private sector firm that does property consulting, but also a volunteer who is chairing a task group developing a standard for ASTM International regarding the assessment of natural hazard and physical climate risk at the property level. ASTM has standards covering many areas, but the perspective I'm coming from today is really from the perspective of the industry, the commercial real estate industry, and all the parties involved with that, people that own, finance, manage, and assess commercial real estate, which is, pretty much everything outside of the single family home world. So from that perspective, we are looking at what are the ways in which we can assess the impact of natural hazard risks, including those made more extreme by climate change, to the property level. And we know that this is interacting with, as you see on this graphic here, existing due diligence and assessment practices, many of which are covered by ASTM International standards that have been developed. It's also interconnected with risk management and underwriting practices. You can see it's also connected with community resilience, and there's a lot of efforts underway to improve community resilience and how communities are prepared to handle natural disasters. And certainly properties are so interconnected with the community at large, but we're looking at what can the property owner, investor, or lender do to really understand what are the vulnerabilities at the property level itself, and how can we make this property more resilient so that it can withstand those stresses in a better way and come out with less damage, quicker recovery time, and so on. So if we could move on to the next slide, just a little bit about ASTM International. They have over 12,000 standards covering many different things. It's a consensus-based process. And so what we're working on in our group is we have over 120 members from banking, property development, consulting firms, engineers, architects, a lot of folks from the climate modeling side, the ESG and sustainability reporting side. Thank you. I know you're like, what slide is she on right now? So we are part of this consensus-based process that ASTM International fosters. So there are over 12,000 standards across the globe. If you could go on to the next slide. ASTM processes are open and transparent. And one of the main points I want to make today is that The power of standards is exhibited through ASTM. Thank you. So ASTM is this open, transparent process. And you see on this list a number of different standards that are utilized in the commercial real estate transaction and finance space. And if you're not from that world, you might feel that this is a very, mundane topic. But the point I want to make today is standards are powerful, especially when they're adopted at scale. So in the case of the environmental site assessment standard that you see listed there, this was developed around 30 years ago, and it was recognized by EPA as a methodology to disclose environmental impairment in a property transaction situation. And because it was recognized by EPA, it is used across the US and internationally as well for buyers, sellers, lenders to understand what is the environmental condition at a property. That may also sound kind of mundane if you're not in that world. However, if you think about the power of that and think about all of the environmental impairments that have been discovered and dealt with and the impacts to human health, positive impact to human health as a result of the use of this standard in property transactions daily across the US and internationally. Compared with what had happened before that, which was that a regulatory agency needed to kind of identify that there was a risk at a property, require the owner to clean it up. Now this type of information is coming up in a property transaction and it's dealt with before the property can be sold or financed. So it's very powerful that these types of assessments are utilized in a property transaction and that they're generally accepted by all the parties involved in a transaction, from the buyers to the sellers to the lenders to the rating agencies. Everyone can agree on what an environmental site assessment is, what a seismic risk assessment is, and so on. So it provides this common language that people can use in a property transaction. It reveals what impairments might exist at the property so they can be dealt with. And that is what we're working on with our new standard. If you could go to the last slide, thank you. The reason why we feel this is really necessary is that the pressure to disclose physical climate risk at the property level and up through an organization is growing, and yet there is no globally recognized consensus-based standard on how to assess that risk at the property level. There are many standards that have been developed for portfolios to identify the physical risk within a portfolio or to identify the risk at the community level, but there are not so many for the property level. So we're looking at how can we assess this at that real estate, kicking the tires level. We also, as I said, want to provide this common language. So within this context of property transactions and financing, that common language can be provided. I will also say, similar to the ESA, the Environmental Site Assessment Standard was created about 30 years ago, and it has been revised numerous times. The standard we're working on physical risk, this is just the first effort. And we are pulling together from over 120 different individuals involved in the task group. We're pulling together best practices from many other associations and industry organizations that have prepared guidance. So ours is going to be an umbrella. We're not trying to create another one to compete, but to be an umbrella under ASTM to live alongside those other ASTM standards that are typically used in those real estate transaction scenarios. And through that, we know that we're just starting this process, that it'll be an iterative process of updating the standard, probably pretty frequently at first. And then over a few-year period of time, these standards get renewed because the practice is evolving. So the two main points that I would like to make today about ASTM International and my experience with them is that they're so important because they do have power in terms of, for example, the ESA and identifying those environmental impairments and making our communities safer. And they are also this guidepost, this starting place from which an industry consensus can be gained and we can evolve from there. So thanks very much.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. So we're going to move to the discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we've got more screen room to see each other. I've got some questions to start with. Please, if you have any questions, either chat them, or if you'd like, put your hand up, and we're happy to unmute you to let you ask your question. But just to kick off, something you said. So we have two Hollies, so I always have to say, so the last Holly Neva, you said standards are powerful when they're adopted at scale, which I thought was really interesting. And then I think, well, but when they're not, we're just starting up. So what are the drivers? Why should companies adopt standards? I mean, what's the point? What's in it for them? What are the drivers for them to do that? And what are the benefits? And maybe we go the other way around and start with Holly Elwood first, and then do Micah and Holly Neva.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I mean, I think the drivers are there's many for companies to utilize sustainability standards. First of all, I think it can really help to create a market differentiator for your company in the marketplace. We're seeing lots of purchasers around the globe asking more and more for more sustainable products and services. Most of the climate impacts, if we take one environmental impact area, happen in the supply chain of organizations. So the only way that we're all going to reduce our climate impacts and be able to continue to live on the earth is if we actually begin to ask for more sustainable products and services that have less climate impacts in their production process. So many of us as purchasers are going to be asking more and more about what kind of climate impacts are associated with the production process, and have companies taken actions that are helpful to reducing those climate impacts. So getting out ahead of that and gaining that market share that can be achieved as a result of doing that, I think is going to be really helpful for companies to consider doing. It also helps to simplify and clarify your communication on your sustainability messaging to consumers. And increases the credibility of your sustainability claims. So there's definitely a lot of distrust of company claims in the marketplace around sustainability. We have a FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, green guides that are used in the US, and I know many other countries, the UK has them as well, have very strict rules about the kinds of claims you can make in the market as a company, and using standards helps you stay in line with those claims and provide credible information that purchasers can use in their procurements. And I wanted to say, you can also, of course, green your own purchases in your companies by asking your suppliers to meet specific sustainability standards and eco labels. And you can also engage, as Holly was saying, and I know that Micah would say as well, in helping to build these sustainability standards. You don't just have to be receiving them and utilizing them. You can really help shape them to meet the needs of your company. And you may have a company that is particularly innovative in a particular environmental area, and you want to get credit in the marketplace for that. You can help to shape a standard where you can get some criteria built that will give you points, literally, in the market for having taken those actions. So want to really encourage people to think about engaging, as Holly and Micah have, in building standards that meet their needs for their sectors.
Great, thank you. Micah, some comments on that?
So I concur with everything Holly just put forward. I'd just like to add that I think we also need to look at the end of life of a product. So not just what we purchase as part of a supply chain, but also how the user uses a product. I mean, we can buy gasoline, and it's actually at the end user where the largest impact on climate is in terms of combusting the fuel. So we also have to look at how a product is used at the end, and what its sustainability, quote unquote, or climate change performance is. So how, does a product support a circular economy, essentially? Talking about at scale, I like to compare the impact of standards to the use of cell phones and laptops and so on that we carry around the globe if we still can travel. We have the wireless standard, 802.11, happens to be an IEEE standard that is globally adopted. We can everywhere around the globe, as long as there's any connectivity, we can communicate across the standard. But in order to charge our devices, we are lugging around different adapters, right? So because we have not been able to agree on a plug standard and a electricity standard. Like I remember somebody telling me that Ontario used to run, I don't know, 55 cycles, and it went up to 60. But like different power systems. And another one that's very comparable, where we never agreed on a standard, is railroad tracks. If you go from Paris to Moscow, you have to change trains because the tracks are different somewhere around the Polish border or from Poland to Russia. I forget where. I never having had the opportunity to take that train. It's one of my bucket lists. But standards allow us to be global in our trade. So any device that's produced with 802.11, Wi-Fi standards and so on, you can sell anywhere. So the power of the standard is that you can work with different suppliers and different vendors around the globe and to sell your products globally without having to produce different versions. And if we can make these sustainable standards with sustainable design first, then we make a big, huge impact on making this world more sustainable.
Great, thank you. And Holly Neva, you get to comment.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, and the standards I'm involved with are probably more risk management related. And what they really allow for is the free flow of capital, because everyone in a chain of some sort of transaction has the clarity and the certainty that they understand, and there's a common language being used about what's being disclosed to them. So that's the benefit that we see from our perspective.
Thank you. And oh yeah, what you mentioned, supply chain, and I'm thinking that a lot of companies think, well, my supply chain is really complex. I mean, yeah, in theory, I agree with you, but my supply chain is so complex. Where do I start? It just seems so huge and difficult. Where are the first steps? What would you advise companies to do as a first step here?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jonathan. And we do talk about that quite a bit with folks. And I think there's a lot of different ways that companies can start based on who they are and where they are in their sustainability journey. But some of those are, you could prioritize by the highest selling products that you have. You could focus on the products with customers that are most clamoring for product sustainability information. Or you could focus on reducing your overall climate impacts. And you can first, once you've decided which of those approaches you'll take, you can then take a look at the sustainability standards and eco labels that apply to your product or service that you're offering to the marketplace. And then determine which of those you may decide to focus your efforts on. And you can find a list of those standards at epa.gov/greener products. You can also look at ecolabellingindex.org for any other standards or eco labels that EPA may not have assessed yet, but may be in the market for your product or service category if we're not covering it at this point. You also may want to take a look at the standards that are being used as the basis for how to determine your greenhouse gas emissions and to set science-based reduction targets. And that's more of a corporate-wide kind of activity that is really being asked for more and more by purchasers. And then I would say you could benchmark your sustainability efforts against the criteria in the standards, and that will give you a sense of where you are in your process and determine which criteria your products and services or your company already meet and which you're going to need to do some additional work to achieve over time. And then you might want to determine if and how you might seek third-party certification that your product or service or a company meets a particular standard, and then develop a marketing strategy to let everybody know if you've done the work that you actually do have third-party certified products and services available in the marketplace.
And I'm interested in the building, Holly, Nebo, how does this differ? So I've got a building, I've done my risk analysis, but I can't just do it myself. I need people in my supply, the people supplying my building materials, perhaps I need them to be compliant. How do you get your whole supply chain to agree with you and to act in a way that helps?
Is that to me, Jonathan?
Yeah, that's to you.
Well, what we're really working on with the standard I'm working on is how resilient is the property in the face of natural hazards. We're not looking at the whole life cycle of sustainability, although it's really interesting how these two worlds are coming together. We have the adaptation space for the physical environment and the climate mitigation space, and they don't always align. So, for instance, if you have a building that is subject to extreme flood hazard, you might be tempted to utilize some building methodologies that would include a lot of concrete, right, for flood barriers or seawalls or what have you. And that might not have a very positive impact on the climate side.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important that those two communities do work together to figure out the most sustainable solution for the resilience of the building. I don't know, Holly Elwood, if you have any thoughts on that.
Absolutely. 14 to 16% of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from steel and cement. So we need to really be thinking about that when we're making our building design choices and addressing climate adaptation needs as well. So well said.
Micah, comment on the supply chain?
Actually, I was just going to comment on Holly and Holly. I think what we were just talking about, the balancing of the urgency of today versus the urgency of tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
The short-term issues that we have to address in terms of building for resiliency, and on the long term to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to a level that will allow us to have a flourishing planet and well-being of a society and planet. In terms of supply chain, I hear from a couple of large companies, and I will avoid company names here, that they have put requirements on their purchasing policies in terms of the products they buy and their performance in terms of sustainability or greenhouse gas emissions, different criteria. And they evaluate not only on cost of their supplies, they evaluate on GHG emissions and sustainability of their product, of the products they want to purchase. A caveat, there is, it's difficult because the standards are, different people or different organizations use different standards. There's different reporting, and it's difficult to find suppliers who are entirely so what you want to say net zero. Like we're talking a little bit of utopia there, actually. And but what I was told is that this is also viewed as a way to engage with the suppliers around sustainability and educate around sustainability. So it looks like these couple of large companies are taking a lead on educating their supply chain on the procurement side. And I thought that was a very interesting piece to share. But standards are not there for all the reporting, and it's not easy for smaller companies in the supply chains to report. And so I see there's a lot of opportunity for us to come up with tools that are widely used and acceptable for people. And of course, then is the other side of the supply chain, as I mentioned earlier, the customer base, the communication to the customer, and then also the customer education to use a product in a way that is sustainable, because of course we can also misuse product.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting you're saying power, and that was the thing that struck me from Holly Elwood's presentation. The purchasing power of the federal government in the US, I think, is the largest in the world. So it's kind of your best case scenario. But all of us in all our companies, we all, and even down to the individual, we decide what we buy, right? That's the individual choice. Where do I spend my euro or my dollar or my pound? And I think that purchasing power, and you all use the word power, and I think that is something really interesting that the approach is there to say, well, if I buy, then I'm going to buy this way, is potentially changing.
If I may, there's another piece to that, of course, and that's the investment community.
Mm-hmm.
If I look at myself as an investor, not saying that I'm a large investor or anything, but what choices do I make? And as people move forward with making green choices, like I've got friends, they would never buy like a fossil fuel company, a stock anymore today. Okay. And so choices are being made that on the one hand will change the financial landscape to a certain extent, the financing landscape, but it also forces us to come up with some better standards, reporting standards, so that people actually get what they are trying to get in terms of the purchase. And I think that's what we are talking about here. How do we actually communicate clearly on this is what is on offer, this is what I would like, and ascertain that the story is true from both sides.
Yeah. How do you trust those eco labels and the packaging? Is it real? You hear all sorts of stories, or you can read them on the internet, whether this is a better choice than that. But how do we know? I think you raised that Holly, the element of trust. Well, what can we do to make people trust the standards more?
Speak up.
It's maybe an open question. Maybe that's an open question.
Maybe somebody in the audience has some good suggestions.
Yeah. I know from the risk management side, it's also sort of trying to help provide a common language for speaking about long-term considerations, at least in the commercial real estate and property value space. The property values are based on the market conditions today, but the purchaser doesn't always have insights into the long-term risks that might apply to that property. And so, from the standpoint of, will people make different decisions if they have access to all of the information that might be relevant? And this has been, as I mentioned on the environmental site assessment piece, prior to an environmental site assessment being recognized by the EPA, it was just sort of handled through legal channels if someone sold a property that had an impairment without disclosing that. But now it's a standardized process. And so people will have some confidence when they buy a piece of property that they know what they're getting. And I think including the future climate risk considerations into that, they can then be thinking about the full picture. Is this property worth what I think it's worth? And what kind of mitigation actions, adaptation actions might I need to be making in the future?
Thank you. So in the interest time, I think it was one more question. I picked up from Micah, you mentioned something, I think you were saying that comparing the safety culture that we spent years kind of developing and is now just the way companies operate. And that same kind of feeling needs to move to the sustainability culture where it's just the way business is done. And I was wondering, that's great, I get it, but what's holding companies back? Because I don't think we're there yet, but what's holding people back from just sustainability, just one of those hygiene factors that business needs to attend to?
I think what happens is that people think it's going to cost them more money. It will increase the cost of their product. And I think to a large extent, that may be a misunderstanding. Same as like putting various safety measures in place. It does cost, but ultimately over the longer term, the payback is huge. And I think the same thing is true for behaving more sustainably. We do know that companies that have more of a sustainable culture, and meaning sustainable not just from a financial perspective, but from a perspective of how employees are treated and how the interaction with the community is functioning before the company, their impact on the environment and so on. These companies actually have a track record of employees, for example, staying longer. That is a financial impact, right? Just as a very simple example. And so I think if we would go through and analyze different companies that are further along the sustainability or becoming more sustainable pathway, that we will find that is actually a financial advantage. And that story has not been shared enough, right? So if we can do that, if we can get that story out and talk to, get people to talk who are behaving in this way in terms of running their companies, then I think we may move further on the enterprise side.
Mike, I think the comparison to the safety culture is very appropriate. You know, that there's a lot of documentation that companies that have a safety culture are more successful long-term financially. And I think that the same holds true for those who take sustainability seriously.
Yeah. And we can bring proof of that too.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up, and I was just going to invite you, each one of you, to have just a few final words that you'd like to share with everyone. Which order should we go in? We'll pick a Holly first, but which Holly?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I'll just say it's been a pleasure to get to speak today and to have this conversation with Holly and Micah and Jonathan and Andrew, and really appreciate that. And if people have additional questions or want to reach out after this, very much look forward to continuing the conversation. I'll make sure to put my email in the chat, and really encourage people to think about standards and eco-labels that they would like to have assessed, to have added to EPA's recommended list of standards and eco-labels. And to consider utilizing those recommended standards and eco-labels in your procurements, and to just think about where you might start in terms of getting your products more sustainable and starting to utilize standards to help you to do that, and to communicate out to purchasers what you have available that is more sustainable and in alignment with some of these standards. So looking forward to continuing the conversation, and really happy to have had this opportunity to talk about this important topic.
Great, thank you very much. And Holly?
Yes.
Holly.
Yes, it's been a great pleasure to speak alongside Holly and Micah and learn a lot from both of them. I think for me, being a private sector person whose entire livelihood has been really centered around the use of ASTM International standards, it's my pleasure to speak and represent ASTM International standards today. And if anyone in the audience would like to learn more about ASTM or the specific standard that we're working on in my task group, just please let me know. I'd love to help out and connect you.
Super. Thank you. And Micah, last words, and then I'll hand over to Andrew.
Well, thank you very much. And I echo Bruce Hawley's. It was a great pleasure being here and connecting with you, learning from you. And I'm sure we will keep this connection alive and work together at someday in the future. What I'd like to state is that, like, on a global level, standards are a big accelerator for economic development. And like, I like to compare it like this. Energy is the kingpin of developing economies, but standards are playing that role for global trade and thus helping global economies moving forward. And if we are truly moving forward with becoming a more sustainable world, then if we have standards that really support sustainable enterprises, behavior in enterprises, behavior in people, and behavior in governments, then building these standards that support this goal is going to be a long way towards success.
Super. Thank you so much. Thank you. Andrew, over to you. And thank you all very much from me and Andrew.
Yes, thank you, panel. Thank you, Micah Lucan. Thank you, Holly Niebuhr. Thank you, Holly Elwood, for sharing your time and your expertise with us. It's really interesting conversation. We've met and had calls a few times leading up to this, and every single time I've learned something. And today I've just learned so much more. It's been wonderful. It's fascinating, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you also to the audience for engaging with us, and we hope you each had some personal takeaways. I've got many takeaways, and I just think I might highlight a couple that we heard the panel say and potentially repeat. This one about we have over decades created a safety culture, and now we need to develop a sustainability culture. That was a light bulb moment for me, it really was. Developing community resilience to the impact of natural events. And another phrase that I called out, standards are powerful, especially when adopted at scale. That was kind of really meaningful. And of course, the power of the pocketbook from the EPA as a signal to boost change. This was these are all really good comments and really good things for me to remember and take away and learn and try to extol the virtues of what we heard today. As I said at the very beginning, the event is recorded and this will be available very soon. So please share with colleagues who may also be interested. We're also well aware that people will be listening at this at some other point in the future and not necessarily live. And so thank you to those future listeners as well. We'd be delighted to have your feedback. Please send it in to us. And if you have any recommendations for events in the future, we're also very delighted to hear from you. So thanks again, and thank you to the panel. Thank you, Jonathan. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.